Welcome to our presentation for the 4th Annual Social Work and Ecological Justice Virtual Conference sponsored by Adelphi University. My name is Shenae Osborn, and I represent the International Federation of Social Workers at the UN. Along with my colleagues, we will be sharing our experiences of thinking, writing, and advocating for climate justice beyond silos and what brings us hope. In this presentation, we will be providing an overview of the global landscape, the work of IFSW, the IFSW policy we co-authored, the role of social workers in advancing a new eco-social world, the global conference, the People's Summit, it co-convened with the United Nations Research Institute on Social Development, culminating in the People's Charter for Co-Building an Eco-Social World. We will review the holistic recommendations of the policies and the People's Charter and provide examples of how the statement has been used in our UN advocacy efforts to bridge the work of the UN and UN agencies, civil society, and social workers practicing across the globe to holistically address environmental and climate justice as integral to sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals have been embraced by governments, civil society, and the private sector as a framework for creating a better world by 2030. While progress has been initially made in some areas, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic increased global conflicts, global inflation, gross inequalities have had a devastating impact. These crises have reversed progress on peace and ending hunger in some low-income countries. On average, globally, only 16% of the SDG targets are on track to be achieved by 2030, with the remaining 84% demonstrating limited or a reversal of progress. So where does IFSW fit in? IFSW is a collaboration of over 150 global country members whose professional social work skills are dedicated to protecting human rights and social justice by creating transformational changes that create inclusive and sustainable communities on micro, meso, and macro levels. As international social workers, we strive to connect people and communities to resources that will enable them to face their challenges in an empowering way, so that all can live a safer, more just life through co-determination, co-production, and social responsibility. As duty bearers, social workers work to ensure that all people have decent social protection. The work of IFSW is organized around partnerships, actions, policy, and advocacy. In the IFSW UN Commission, we accomplished this work. In the IFSW UN Commission, we accomplished the work previously discussed of partnerships, advocacy, policy, and advocacy through writing statements based on UN meeting themes, submit to aligned commissions, hosting side panel events, organizing events for high-level political forums, Social Work Day at the UN, student-led global conference, Panama Conference, sharing best practices via conferences and publications, and contributing to the IFSW policy.
I'm Evelyn Tomaszewski, IFSW representative to the United Nations, North America. I'm very excited to be presenting at this conference. I'm going to highlight the IFSW policy, the role of social workers in advancing an eco-social world, and connect to our practice as social workers. The aim of this framework is to establish a consensus that balances all rights through participatory engagement in inclusive policies and practices, and focus on our shared futures. These include individual human rights, dignity and fundamental freedoms, social human rights, civil, economic, political, cultural rights, ecosystem rights, and the broader rights of nature. Each of these are reflected and represented in our codes of ethics and our own work. The framework has driving values and principles that I think will also connect with your everyday work. The importance of diversity, sustainability, and self-determination, and that we are each and all responsible to protect and advance the rights of others as well as nature. Within the policy, the International Federation of Social Workers created recommendations that are framed within the recognition that social workers are actively working across the micro, meso, and macro levels of practice, and we engage in co-designing and co-building programs and policy that facilitates capacity building and promoting opportunities that support and build sustainable development and eco-social practice. As I go through these recommendations and highlight the commitments made by IFSW, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on your own work and see how it is and may well be represented in these recommendations. The ecosocial approach requires key actions in the equally considered dimensions as we commit to co-design and co-build urgent global action to implement the 5 dimensions of sustainability, each of which are clearly framed across the Sustainable Development Goals. These are people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. That we commit to engaging governments and other key stakeholders to recognize social workers as key partners in global action, with the role of engaging and working with communities as agents of change. That we work to integrate these principles of the new ecosocial world into social work education, and that we commit to transforming social protection systems from reactive, needs-based, to preventative systems to support communities prior to natural disasters, environmental degradation, and pandemics, so they are better equipped to withstand these events. I want to highlight a little bit more about these recommendations. And again, as we review these, think about our own practice, our code of ethics, the CSW competencies that guide our work in academia, the code of conduct that guide your licensure, and our historical context as social workers in identifying and addressing inequities and injustices and working and promoting equity. To address current and historical injustices, we commit to address current and historical justices that impact people as barriers to their involvement in co-designing and co-building our shared futures. To building partnerships and allyships to work with local communities to collaboratively identify the necessary steps for a just and sustainable world. To commit to look for, to support visionary leadership by national associations and other entities that create policy and direct practice eco-social initiatives rooted in the holistic human rights framework. And to eradicate poverty through creating sustainable economies and environmental and social systems that leave no one behind. I encourage you to review this policy to see how it connects with your work and how your own work, however, and the range in which we practice can help implement and support an eco-social world. It's clear that social workers are stakeholders in developing and sustaining partnerships that establish and deepen interdisciplinary multisectorial approaches to eco-social practice that works to advance the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. As social workers, I believe we have a dual role as both rights holders and duty bearers. Through our commitment to promote and work for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice, we have a great opportunity as well as a role in ensuring that the SDGs are attained.
My name is Deepak, and the narrative we are sharing this presentation is where I find hope. Shortly after the policy we co-authored was adopted by IFSW General Assembly, The People's Global Summit was held. This online summit was co-convened by the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development and IFSW. This conference was groundbreaking in many ways. It was online, and there was no cost to participate. It offered multiple ways to contribute beyond traditional academic papers, including blogs, dances, songs, interviews, poetry, storytelling, and TikTok-style videos. It was initiated by 26 organizations representing hundreds of millions of people of different faiths, philosophies, rights movements, workforces, generations, traditions, and cultures. All of these contributions shaped the People's Charter for a new eco-social world, which is a living document. The development of the People's Charter was shaped by the mutual recognition that we're at a global crisis point that requires that we work beyond silos that divide to build a new eco-social world. The Charter is only 2 pages long, and it's an invitation to join in co-creating policies, practices, and actions based on inclusion, intergenerational respect, mutual understanding, a celebration of differences, and agreement on shared futures. It encompasses a recognition of community-led movements and Indigenous wisdom, and acknowledges that young people and future generations are co-creators of this movement for a new eco-social world. The values of the People's Charter are buen vivir, a concept rooted in the cosmovision of the Quechua people in the Andes, which includes love and care for people and the planet, responsibilities, and holistic rights. Respect, dignity, harmony, and social justice, diversity, belonging, reciprocity, and equity. Ubuntu, a concept from African philosophy that means I am because we are, and includes accountability and togetherness, made popular by Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. Finally, solidarity, inclusion, and collaboration. The actions outlined in the People's Charter for the pathway forward for us locally and globally in collaboration include ecological integrity, from exploitation to recognizing the rights of nature for sustainable coexistence, economic reform, from measuring economies by profit to sustainable well-being societies, international solidarity, moving from national introspection to global cooperation, employment and work, from being undervalued to being recognized with dignified working conditions. Finally, state social protection, from reactive public spending to public investment in well-being. Bringing this back to our role as social workers, the People's Charter provides us with a tool for analysis and action grounded in the People's Charter that enables us to first think outside the box, the problems we're facing and the solutions, both of which are interconnected. Number 2, centering partnership with communities, in which all efforts include co-designing and co-building. Number 3, embrace a holistic human rights framework that includes nature and ecosystems. Number 4, center our analysis and action on economic development that is good for workers, communities, natural environments, and systems. And 5, questioning false solutions, as we're guided by our holistic human rights framework and values, such as solutions to climate change that rely on extractive systems that hurt communities and their environments.
Hello, everyone. We wanted to focus on how social workers across the world are bringing the ideas of the Charter and the IFSW policy statements to life in practice. These are just some examples, but they highlight the work across the world from micro, meso to macro. I'll begin with examples from Australia, Brazil, and the United States, and conclude with the work we are doing as part of the United Nations major event this year, the Summit of the Future, which is happening in September, which I'll explain a little bit more about what that means and why it's central to eco-social approaches and the future of the Sustainable Development Goals. More specifically, in Australia, social workers, including myself as part of the project that you can see on the screen, are working with communities, industry and government to address unemployment, discrimination and sustainability. So this project, which is an example of these principles in practice, began by working in partnership with representatives from African community groups, Afghan and refugee groups from the Asia region, and we co-created a model of wraparound support services to address major barriers to employment. This included really issues like transport, language proficiency, and building cultures of inclusiveness. The project itself is underpinned by the African collectivist philosophy of Ubuntu, which was also the theme for World Social Work Day last year. And this model, which was co-created, is now being implemented in relation to several industries with a focus on sustainable and environmentally forms of employment, including recycling centres. And this is in thanks to partnerships and collaborations with communities, but also industry and government. For some other examples that I just wanted to draw your attention to, we really wanted to focus on this really excellent side panel event that was coordinated and run by the International Federation of Social Workers at North America UN Commission, which is part of the 61st session of the UN Commission for Social Development. The event hosted two amazing speakers working in this space and really highlights great examples of these ideas and what we mean by co-building and eco-social work in practice. The speakers talk about some really great examples, including the National Movement of Waste Pickers and several other worker cooperative initiatives through the Democracy at Work Institute. We can provide a link to this session, and both speakers really highlight how worker-led movements contribute towards building an eco-social world through a commitment to sustainability, economic empowerment, community involvement, and workers' rights. In terms of the macro work that we do, the Summit of the Future is really the key event in 2024. The ideas of the Charter really inform social work practice at the highest levels of policy work, and this is really best represented by the IFSW work at the United Nations Summit of the Future. The summit, which is, as you can see, is happening in New York this year from the 22nd to the 23rd of September, is considered a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance cooperation on critical challenges and address major gaps in global governance. So this is fundamentally just around accountability and how the UN system itself runs. So according to the UN, the aim is really to reaffirm existing commitments, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Charter, and move towards re-energized, reinvigorated multilateral system that is better positioned to impact people's lives positively. A major outcome of this gathering is going to be the Pact for the Future, which seeks to really create and articulate clearer commitments and actions to address the biggest challenges we face for people and planet. The IFSW UN Commission has been part of every major event in the build-up to the summit. This has been happening for the last 12 months, and the key ideas from the People's Charter and other IFSW documents have been the basis for our advocacy, where we call for urgent reform. We're advocating for major UN systems and process reforms that recognise the role of non-government groups and communities and give them meaningful input into the UN system. Member states continue to be the biggest barriers to achieving the SDGs, and if it can be done, it requires the UN to evolve beyond its rigid and archaic modes of engagement and collaboration. Co-creation must recognise that governments don't necessarily speak for their people, and the UN needs to formally recognise people assemblies and other movements if they wish to create a truly multilateral approach.